Wokingham Today is hosting a series of interviews with leaders of local political parties in the run-up to the 2024 local elections. Each leader will answer questions on 5 topics. At the end, they'll be invited to make a direct address to you, the voter. While the leaders have been given advance warning of the topics that we will cover, they have not been given the questions in advance. Wokingham Today has created ward pages on its website, giving you the chance to meet the candidates standing in your ward. So for this interview, I'm joined by Stephen Conway, who is the leader of Wokingham Lib Democrats and also the current leader of Wokingham Borough Council. Thank you for joining us today, Stephen.
Thank you for inviting me, Phil.
The first topic that we're going to look at is the issue of council budgets, council financing. And one of the things that residents really notice is their council tax keeps going up by the maximum amount allowed each year. Do you think that councils see residents as a piggy bank that they can raid?
I think it's deeply regrettable that the council has been obliged to put the council tax up to the full amount allowed by the government. The government caps the council tax at 4.99% in total, including the component for social care for adults and children. We have been obliged to go up to that cap level, not because we want to, but because the government gives us a certain amount of money on the assumption we will go up to that cap level. And if we don't go up to that cap level, they think they don't need to give us that money. So we need the government to give us the money they do give us. Unfortunately, they give us the lowest level of core support in terms of our revenue budgets of any council in the country that has to have responsibility for the very expensive areas of adults and children's services. So this really means, because we are so poorly funded by central government, we have to rely heavily on what money we can raise locally through the council tax and fees and charges. And we have to find savings to reduce budgetary pressures wherever possible. Now, we've tried to respond to the budgetary challenges of Wokingham in bold and innovative ways. We've come up with a strategy of investing now to save later. And if I may, I'll just give you a few examples of this. The first one is our purchase of a care home, which will control future adult care costs. A second would be increasing provision in the borough for pupils with special educational needs. And that'll reduce our home to school transport bill in the future. And we're building a new solar farm in Barkham in the south of the borough, which when it's fully operational, will generate nearly £3 million a year in income for the council, which can be spent to support services for our residents. So we're trying to find new ways of saving money and generating income that will reduce the pressure on the council tax in the future. And I would contrast, if I may, our responsible and forward-looking approach with that of the opposition, which has chalked up at least £4.3 million worth of spending pledges for the coming year, nearly all of them in reaction to identified savings that we have proposed to make. Now, how they intend to pay for their spending pledges is, I'm afraid, a mystery. In the past, they've talked very vague terms about back office savings, as if they hadn't run the council for 20 of the last 22 years. We've already made significant reductions in staff costs to help balance the books. Quite how they think they would make an additional saving of 4.3 million in staff costs in the coming year without endangering the viability of the council is something I really just can't fathom.
Democrats have been running the council for 2 years now. Is there anything that you regret that you haven't been able to do? Is there anything you regret that you've had to cut as a result of the financial situation?
Yes, there are many things we regret that we wish we hadn't had to change. We hadn't had to make savings in certain key areas. It is a really big challenge. But I think the important thing to recognise is that when you're faced with a big challenge of this magnitude, financial challenge, you do have to make tough and difficult decisions. And we've not being afraid to make those tough and difficult decisions. And you also have to keep focused on what the primary objectives have to be. And for us, I think we've seen two primary objectives. One is establishing a sound financial base for the council so it can continue to deliver services. A lot of councils across the country are going effectively bankrupt because of the twin challenges of inflation and rising demand for services, especially in adults and children's social care. We have been devoting enormous energies to making sure that we remain financially viable so we can deliver services. And we're trying to focus our efforts primarily on helping those most in need of help. So that means focusing a very significant part of our budget, 2/3 of the total budget, goes on adults and children's social care. Now, we are obliged to provide adults and children's social care by law, by statute, but we're morally obliged to do it too, because I think everyone would agree that in a civilized society, we want to support people like disabled children, adults with learning difficulties, and the frail elderly. It's what a civilized society is about. So we've been trying to be really clear in our strategic objectives to make sure the council is financially viable and to focus support on those who most need it in these really difficult and challenging times.
Your manifesto, which is available on the Wokingham Lib Dem's website, it talks about stuff that you have done or you are doing, but there doesn't seem to be much in the way of new policies or plans on there. So is this lack of vision due to a lack of money?
Well, I would say that there's lots of ambition there and there's lots of vision. I certainly have a vision for a council that works alongside others in partnership to try and tackle the problems that the borough faces. I have a vision of trying to modernise the council so it functions as a truly 21st century council that recognises that it can't do everything on its own. Resources simply do not allow that. So we have to work creatively with others and embrace the opportunities of working with others to try and ensure that our residents and our businesses are properly served. I regard that as quite a big vision, a vision of a new kind of council that is working alongside others in order to try and maximise our ability to be able to help the community we're here to serve.
Manifesto also talks about Wokingham becoming a leading local authority for supporting residents on low incomes and fighting poverty in an affluent area. What do you actually mean by that? What's your vision there?
Well, I think to be poor, to be lacking in resources, to be really financially challenged, as many people are in the current cost of living crisis, is a really big and difficult thing to cope with in any circumstances. But if you are really suffering from a lack of financial resources in a society that is generally well off and affluent, it's even harder because you lack some of the social support networks that exist in many communities which don't have lots of high income people living within them. So it is a big challenge. And we know that a lot of people have been really badly affected by the cost of living crisis of the last 2 years. The inflation that is partly imported from the war in the Ukraine, partly of our own making in this country, unfortunately. The Truss quartile mini budget, September 2022, undoubtedly had a big impact on many people's finances. It put up mortgage rates, interest rates, and it's really had a significant impact, pushing many people who've been managing okay into a position of financial hardship. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the challenges that, as a result of the cost of living crisis and the high rates of interest on mortgages in the last 2 years. And that has brought many people into unaccustomed difficulty. And we're trying to work really creatively with our partners in the Hardship Alliance. This is a group of local charities working alongside the council in this alliance to try and maximise our ability to help people who are in financial hardship at the moment. Now, we're doing this by pooling our data, our knowledge, our experience, our expertise, and our resources, whether those are human resources, material resources, or financial resources. And by working together in this way, we are reaching more people than the council could possibly reach all on its own. So again, that's an example of that vision I was outlining earlier on, of a council that is prepared to work with others to try and tackle problems and doesn't simply believe it has all the solutions itself.
One of the things that you have done this past year, you've set aside £250,000 in funding to help with poverty projects. There's been criticism that you just set that money aside without actually having a plan. And do you think that that is a fair criticism, or do you think that it's more important to have the resource available to try and help residents who need more additional support?
I don't think it's a fair criticism. I think it's vitally important to earmark money to help those who are in hardship. The precise mechanisms by which you spend it are going to change according to what the priorities are. Recently, as you, I'm sure, know, Phil, the government was looking as though it was going to withdraw the Household Support Fund, which is a vital lifeline to many families. Thankfully, it didn't withdraw it in the end, or at least it gave it a stay of execution for 6 months. So we have been budgeting in a way that's putting money aside so we can help people who might in the future lose the Household Support Fund. And we wanted to be flexible about how we did that. And we will continue to try and address this in a flexible way, working alongside our partners to make sure the money is spent to good effect and helps those who most need the help. That seems to me a very reasonable approach. If we went into this with a very prescribed view of how that money should be spent and circumstances changed, we would look very foolish. We'd be funneling money into something that wasn't very effective. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that every pound of that money is spent to good effect and helps those people who really need the help.
One of the things that you've touched on already is the increase in the SEND schools provision in the borough. Is that something that you are proud of, or is it something that you want to try and do more of?
Well, I'm both proud of and want to do more of. We want to expand provision for SEND pupils across the borough because it's important that SEND pupils have the opportunity to go to a good local school that will help them lead rich and fulfilled lives. And we are very committed to expanding provision for young people who have special educational needs. This obviously has an important financial aspect too. If you don't have enough provision within your borough for special educational needs pupils, you end up having to pay for very expensive trips out of the borough to distant schools to enable those pupils to get the education they deserve. We want to provide the education they deserve within the borough, both because we think that will be much better for them, but also because we know it will be better for council finances. So I'm immensely proud of our achievement in securing funding for 2 new SEND schools, but that's just part of the story. Now, we've also expanded SEND provision within existing schools. So we are trying across the board to improve SEND provision so that we can ensure that SEND pupils get a fair deal and the council can save on its home to school transport bill, which is one of our big cost pressures at the moment.
Changing the subject now to talk about the changes to waste collections. You're pressing ahead with these wheelie bins. They're going to be arriving in boroughs' doorsteps over the next few weeks. They're going to have fortnightly collections for waste and recycling, with food waste kept every week. why exactly are you pressing ahead with this when the government hasn't actually announced exactly what's going to be happening? Because you could just be spending money and wasting it because we'll find out in a couple of years' time that actually we need to be doing something completely different.
Well, I think the government has actually been fairly clear about the direction of travel it wants to see. It wants more containerisation of waste, which means bins, and it wants a consistent approach between councils. It's emphasised the importance of consistency. Now, 85% of councils have alternate weekly collections, and we're therefore, I think, going to be obliged to adopt that approach sooner or later, whether you like it or not. The status quo, whatever the opposition might claim, is just not an option, and they know that. They know that. But I really do think it's important to not just focus on what the government are compelling us to do, and we're going to have to do sooner or later, so we may as well get on and do it while we have some control over it. We also should just think about some of the positives about this. The changes to the waste collection will save us money, and we do need to save money at the moment, as I've already said. The change to alternate week collections will save about £1 million a year. Now, in the current challenging financial situation, we can't afford to forego that kind of saving. Second, and this is also immensely important, councils that move to alternate weekly collections have a very good record of increasing recycling rates. Now, that's important, of course, environmentally, but it's also important financially, because the disposal of residual waste, non-recyclable waste, costs the council and the council taxpayer money. So it's these three reasons that are driving this change, that the government is mandating this direction of travel, wants bins, wants containerisation of refuse, and it wants consistency across councils. So that requires us to look at what the norm is, and the norm in 85% of councils is alternate weekly collections. So the status quo isn't realistically an option. 2, this will save us money, about £1 million a year. And 3, it will boost recycling rates. So that, to me, is a pretty compelling and strong argument for going down this route.
I have some concern that the bin won't be big enough for residents to put 2 weeks' worth of waste in. Do you have any sympathy with that view?
We will make arrangements to ensure that anyone who has special needs for extra capacity will have it. We're not going to impose upon people a system that is going to lead to their not being able to recycle effectively or deal with their residual waste effectively. I mean, it is worth remembering at the moment, we have these blue bags. I do recall, and having been a councillor for some time, when those blue bags were introduced, there was enormous opposition. People thought they were dreadful. And now we've seen some people as seemingly having fallen in love with them and think they're marvellous. Well, I have to say, the only people I've found really who like blue bags are magpies, not that they're really people, and foxes. They love them because they can rip them open. And when people talk about, what are the health risks of fortnightly collection? Well, in a sealed container, they're nil. But in a blue bag, they're very considerable. So I think the blue bags, although some people now seem nostalgically attached to them, were deeply unpopular when they were introduced, and with some, I have to say, with some good cause, because they are not very robust. They can easily be ripped open by animals and birds, and they regularly are. If you go down a street on refuse collection day, you often see ripped bags and the contents spewed all over the pavements and into the roads. Now, that has to then be cleared up by people. It's not a very pleasant sight, and it's not particularly healthy.
Moving on, but staying within the subject of bins, last summer there were bins across the borough that were taped over. There were overflowing bins because they weren't collected. Basically, it was all a bit of a mess, like around the bins, in the bins, and the way in which you responded to it. So, are you ashamed of how that was handled? Would you like to apologise to residents about that?
I have already apologised, actually, for the handling of that. It was not done in the way it should have been done, and it wasn't done in line with the council's constitution. I was not personally responsible for any decision that was made there, but I'm very happy to apologise on behalf of the council for the blunder that was made. But I think if we look beyond that blunder, a cross-party task and finish group has been established on the council to explore whether there are any ways to rationalise the number and location of litter bins, and town and parish councils are going to be involved in that work. Now, I don't envisage any major changes emerging from that process, as most of the bins are very clearly needed.
Car park charges is one of the big things as well that's come up this year. You've just increased parking charges in the country parks of Dinton and California. You're talking about increasing car parking fees again in the summer. The opposition suggests that they're going to be able to reverse them. So who's got this right? Is it you or is it the opposition?
Well, I think if the opposition proposing to reverse them, then you should add quite a bit of money to that £4.3 million of unfunded spending pledges that they've made already. There'll be a very considerable sum to add on to that. Should we just try and put this in some kind of context? Let's talk about the country parks parking first. These have gone up by 30 pence an hour this year, as a result of the need to cover the costs of the countryside service and help pay for improved facilities at Dinton pastures. And it's worth remembering that we don't charge any entrance fee for these facilities, any entrance fee. This is the only revenue stream that's available to the countryside service. And these charges still compare very favourably with charges at similar facilities run by other councils in our area. And I'm afraid the increase is a symptom of the general problem of serious government underfunding, which obliges us to raise most of the money for our services from savings or increases in our income. And we just do need, I'm afraid, to cover the costs of the countryside service. Otherwise, we're subsidising it from other services. Now, the off-street parking charges have increased this year by 10 pence an hour for the first 2 hours. That's all. 10 pence an hour for the first 2 hours. But there's no evidence that earlier increases have had a detrimental effect on usage. And indeed, we've got pretty well clear evidence that in most cases, car parking usage has increased despite the increased charges. Now, unfortunately, as I said earlier, the council is seriously underfunded by central government, which means that we've got to raise ourselves most of what we need to provide the services for our residents. And there are only limited savings and income generation options available to us. In the past, the parking service has effectively been subsidised by other parts of the council. It's drawn in money, in other words, that could have been used to reduce pressure on adults and children's services. Now, I just don't think that's right. It can't be right. The parking service, I think most people would accept, should cover its own costs. Otherwise, it is using up money that ought to be going on really important things, life-changing things like adults and children's social care. So if the opposition think that reversing all of our car parking charges, just supposing for 1 minute that they're serious about that pledge, they need to reflect on what the consequences of that will be. The consequences will be less money available to help vulnerable children and adults. Is that what they really want?
One of the other big things that keeps coming up is the state of the roads in the borough. You're accused of being anti-motorist in many ways, and there's lots of potholes popping up everywhere. But at the same time, you said there's not enough funding coming in from the government. So what can be done? How can this situation be resolved?
Well, You're absolutely right that this is a national problem. That's why national government is really the answer. It has to be prepared to invest more in our road network. And the state of our roads, not just in Wokingham, but across the country, is a result of chronic underfunding over many years of highway structural maintenance. Now, Wokingham is actually, I know not everyone is going to believe this, but it is true, Wokingham is better than many councils in addressing this problem. And what we're doing is now looking at new road surfacing techniques to meet the challenge posed by climate change. And that's a very real challenge to road surfaces and the degradation of road surfaces. I have to say, I find it galling in the extreme. The opposition choose to campaign on potholes and road surfaces when they actually cut the road maintenance budget when they were in control of the council. It doesn't seem to stop them criticising us and implying that we've cut it when we haven't. We haven't cut it at all. We're spending more money this year than last year, not less. So the idea that we've cut budgets and we're anti-car is absolute nonsense. This anti-car nonsense, I think, is based on the efforts we're making to try and promote active travel, that's cycling and walking for short journeys, and public transport. Now, that's not anti-car. The Conservative Party used to be in favour of choice. We're in favour of giving people choice whether they drive in their car or they use a bus or a train, or whether for short journeys they choose to walk or cycle. We think giving them the option is a good thing. And it's also worth remembering that every person who does take up the option of going on a bus or a train or walking or cycling is one fewer person on the roads. And that helps congestion. For those who do want to travel on the road in their own car or need to do so, it makes life easier if there are fewer people on the road competing for road space. So how is that anti-car? I just find it very difficult to understand that logic.
Well, one of the problems that Wokingham has got is it hasn't got a joined up bus network. It's really difficult to get, particularly at evenings and weekends, from the outlying villages into Wokingham town centre. And it just talks about how you want to get people onto buses, but there are no buses to get there. So what can you be doing about that?
Well, we've already been trying to use resource to subsidise important bus routes. We've committed a lot of money in difficult circumstances to trying to sustain bus transport links, which are really important to many people in the borough. We are working constructively, if I may go back to a theme I've already touched upon, which is working with others to try and achieve common objectives. We're working very constructively with Reading Borough Council. Many of the bus routes, of course, traverse local authority boundaries. And obviously Reading is a major pull for people in our area. But there's movement in all directions across those boundaries. And we're working with Reading on common bids for funding, on all sorts of schemes that we hope will make it easier to get our bus services up to the level they need to be in order to be able to meet demand. So we're very conscious of the need to do everything we can, every tool in the toolkit we're going to be using. Now, one of the things we're trying to do is ensure that where housing development takes place, we secure developer contributions towards bus subsidies so that we can lessen reliance on the car as the way of getting around when people, in many cases, would be quite content to use a bus if there was a bus available to use. So this is about trying to use all of the means that we have at our disposal to try and improve the availability of buses and their reliability. And we're not obviously responsible for the running of the bus services, but we have to liaise with the bus operators, especially those whose services are subsidised by us. And we do try to lobby them to make sure that the service they provide is reliable as well as punctual, clean and efficient as it can be. We want to provide people with the option of bus travel And we recognise that we do need to do that by subsidising and by working closely with others to try and maximise our ability to be able to have a good bus service that's fit for a modern borough.
The final topic is about the future of the town centres. Wokingham Borough is quite unique in that it's got quite a number of retail centres. It's not just Wokingham Town Centre.
Yeah.
There's Woodley, there's Twyford, there's Wargrave, Maiden Early, Shamstead as well. What is your vision for all these retail centres?
Well, I think we need to think about this in three ways. So first of all, we need to just try and assess what the current challenges for town centres are. Second, we need to think about what the council's already doing to try and support them. And then third, we need to think about what the council can do in the future. So let's address those points, if I may, in that order. First of all, what's the nature of the problem? Well, town centres, not just in the borough, but across the country, are facing major challenges. Now, some of those challenges are very specific to particular centres, but some of them are pretty general across them all. The current cost of living crisis is, of course, reducing spending power. We hope that's not going to be a permanent situation, but we do know that many businesses are struggling to recruit labour. And perhaps most importantly of all, we know there's been a really significant move to online shopping. And that's been turbocharged by the pandemic lockdowns. And that has inevitably undermined many retail outlets, many traditional shops, which people used to visit. As the larger anchor stores have pulled out, there's inevitably been less trade, and therefore the smaller independents have been put under pressure as well. Now, whether we like it or not, we can't reverse the trend to internet shopping. It's here to stay, and it's likely to get a bigger challenge for shops, not a smaller one. But the picture's not all doom and gloom. Many town centre businesses are actually doing well, especially those that are immune from online competition. So, hairdressers, leisure facilities. You certainly can't get your hair cut online, as far as I'm aware. All those that are surviving and have adapted well to the challenge, such as bars, cafes, restaurant, entertainment venues. Now, the council's already trying to help. It runs bespoke advice sessions for startup businesses. It puts on a jobs fair to help employers recruit. It's organised a business conference. It supports business network groups. And it's appointed in Wokingham Town a town centre officer. And looking ahead, we've already begun work on a town centre strategy, which pulls together existing work and tries to build upon it to support our town centres adapt to the new trading environment. And to this end, we're calling on our external partners. I've talked about working in partnership several times in this conversation, Phil, and this is where it really is starting to pay dividends. We've established a really good strategic partnership with the University of Reading, and one of the advantages of that is it enables us to call on the expertise of the Henley Management Centre, which is part of the University of Reading, and draw on its expertise to help us devise and implement a town centre strategy for the borough, and going to be based on their experience of working on other town centre strategies for other local authorities. And likewise, we're working with the Berkshire Prosperity Board, another key external partner. It's made up of all of the Berkshire unitary councils. It was formed recently with Wokingham, I have to say, playing a big part in leading the way. And it's going to be able to draw on the expertise of the former Local Enterprise Partnership, the LEP. And again, they're very interested in helping us work on a bespoke set of policies and a strategy that will help our businesses in our town centres to adapt to changing conditions and take advantage of new opportunities. And it might be worth me rather cheekily adding, if I may, that you might have noticed that this week the Liberal Democrats nationally have pledged to reform the business rate system so they can give greater support to our high streets.
That concludes the formal part of our interview. And I'm sure there's more we could talk about, but unfortunately, time being what it is, but it is what it is. But we would like to invite you now just to make a direct address to those watching this about why they should be voting for the Liberal Democrats on May the 2nd in Wokingham.
Thank you very much, Phil. That's very kind of you to give me this opportunity. Well, I think I want to say the following, really. The Liberal Democrats want a greener and more prosperous Wokingham in which we can all feel able to play our part. We want to create opportunity for all. We believe in removing barriers to individuals realising their potential, regardless of who they are. This benefits the individuals by enabling them to live happy and fulfilled lives, but it benefits all of us because we will be able to better harness the talents that are out there in our community. And our three priorities for the coming years are: 1, sound council finances. Without these, the council can do nothing positive to support the community. 2, focusing help on those who are most in need, such as disabled children, adults with learning difficulties, and the frail elderly, and those in hardship as a result of the cost of living crisis. And 3, working with other groups and organisations across the community to maximise our ability to make things better for our residents and businesses. The days when the council could work in isolation have gone. We have to modernise and adapt for a financially challenging future. It's tempting to look inwards when times are tough. We're looking outwards to embrace the opportunities that working with others can provide. In this year's all-out elections, everyone will have 3 votes to elect 3 councillors. I hope you'll use your vote or your votes to support the Liberal Democrat candidates in your ward. And if you want information on those candidates, please go to wokinghamlibdems.org.uk. Thank you.
Stephen Conway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.